Hey guys, Society Reviews here are my top 10 best films of 2023. Believe it or not, yes, 2023 was a good year for films. Not every film came in the movie theater or came from the United States, but if you looked hard enough, there were some great films that came out this year, and I've narrowed the list down to 10, starting with number 10, Sympathy for the Devil. Nicolas Cage and Joel Kinnaman stars in the film about a Las Vegas dad on his way to the hospital to see the birth of his unborn child when he is interrupted by a driver who holds him at gunpoint. The passenger demands to be taken where he wants to go, and as the film progresses, you realize there's a lot more to the story that meets the eye. A film that has a glamorous ability to paint a beautiful picture with the limited tools in its arsenal is exactly the type of filmmaking the American film industry needs to get back on top. Cage and Kinnaman are effectively the only two actors of the film, meaning that the movie is solely carried by them. The film is held together by pulling in its audience and making them understand that there's a bigger picture at play here that's been revealed to them. As the deeper we get into the story, the more you realize that Nicolas Cage isn't your typical wacky crazy character that you expect him to be. This is certainly a movie that deserves far better than his VOD release that it got earlier this summer. A low-budget bottle film that absolutely deserves to be seen in movie theater is the type of movie that audiences are sorely missing these days in a sea of reboots and remakes. Sympathy for the Devil definitely makes the list as one of the best sleeper hits of the entire year. Plane is just a straight-up action thriller, and that's really all you need. A film that isn't trying to push a female lead in the role of a man, a film that isn't trying to push some woke agenda, and a film that's not more concerned about how many LGBTQ stars it has in it rather than the quality of the movie itself. Plane is a throwback action film that you guys are used to seeing back in the 1980s and the 1990s. A plane crashes with a small group of passengers who need to get off the island before they are hunted down by a group of revolutionaries. The story never overcomplicates himself to be too hard to follow or loses its plot, and it's straight to the point. All the classic tropes of action movies are here, from explosions to gunfights to strong masculine protagonists. Plane is exactly the type of film that moviegoers need when the A films are failing its audience. The number 8 film on this list goes to a Chinese film called No More Bets. No More Bets follows the story of a programmer who was lured overseas by a supposedly high-paying job. However, it turns out that a group of his peers have essentially been kidnapped and duped by the false promise of employment. They work in a slave factory, which is essentially a fraud factory, and the story mirrors what happens in a lot of offshore betting accounts around the world. The film is an expose of the dark side of money, as so many people are willing to do anything to attain it, it becomes detrimental to themselves and those around them. As the world of online gambling continues to grow, this film comes at a perfect time. No More Bets is an eye-opening film deserving to be on the top 10 of this list. Number 7 on this list is Godzilla Minus One. Arguably the best Godzilla film that we've seen in the last several decades doesn't come from the US, but comes from Japan. One of the biggest knocks on recent Godzilla films is that it focuses way too much on the human characters where all you really want is Godzilla. However, this film makes you care about the human characters and does it in a brilliant way. Minus One is a redemption story about a man who was consumed by cowardice. When given a second opportunity to be the hero that the town needs him to be, our pilot and everyone in town comes together to take on the biggest threat their city has ever seen. It's still amazing to think that this film was produced for less than $15 million, a far cry from the over $300 million production budgets we get from superhero movies out of Marvel and DC. One thing that can't be denied, Godzilla Minus One is an absolute win for Godzilla fans. A film that combines a great emotional story, great pacing, and enough on-screen disaster to rival any movie coming out of Disney. Number 6 on this list is the Ironclaw. If you're a fan of pro wrestling, you know everything about the Von Erichs family. The rise of a great pro wrestling dynasty that came to fame in the 1980s had a tragic, and I do mean tragic, fall. Ironclaw is a great film for normie audiences who haven't previously been disposed to how pro wrestling works. If you're a hardcore fan, you'll know all the names attached to this film, but at the end of the day, this is a movie about family values, and in the end, when it comes to the Von Erichs, only two things matter: wrestling and family. While the film certainly is not going to be an easy watch for anyone, this is certainly one of the top films of the year. Number 5 on this list is The Sound of Freedom. The Sound of Freedom was shot several years ago and was shelved by Disney after the merger. After an intense smear campaign against the movie, Sound of Freedom finally sees the light of day, and we know exactly why media corporations didn't want this to be popular in the first place. Sound of Freedom is one of the most important films to come out in the last couple of decades and only scratches the surface of a much bigger problem. While the reality of these activities of human trafficking may be shocking and disturbing, the media doesn't want anyone to know who funds these operations and runs their endeavors. The film forces the audience to accept the reality they can no longer ignore. It's not the portrayals that make these scenes uncomfortable, it's the reality that this is happening every single day all around the world. When every media organization in the world wants you to not watch something, that's exactly what you need to be watching, and that's why Sound of Freedom is number 5 on this list. The number 4 film on this list is a South Korean film called Switch. A movie that mixes the concepts of Freaky Friday and A Christmas Carol together is one of the most positive and heartwarming family films of the year. Park Kang is a vapid actor who has nothing to show for his life outside of material things. The plot strips away his status, his money, his women, and his fame to focus on things that are actually important in his life, a wife and children. The film makes you appreciate the things that we take for granted. Switch is a traditional feel-good comedy that is well-paced and will leave audiences with a positive outlook of life, which is a luxury of modern cinema. A film that tells you that focusing on family is more important than focusing on fame is something that simply can't come out of Hollywood. The number 3 film on this list is a South Korean film called The Child. A boxer from the Philippines finds out that his birth father runs a corporation in South Korea and decides to visit him for the first time in his life. However, he is immediately cut off by a charismatic hitman who claims to be his friend despite the fact that he constantly puts a gun in his face. As the film progresses, you realize that our boxer has been led to Korea under false pretenses. The film is bloody, it's brutal, and it's over the top. If you're a fan of franchises like John Wick, then this movie is right up your alley. And our charismatic and borderline psychopath hitman is going to be the man that steals the show for this movie. For a film that pushes 2 hours, the pacing is excellent, and the story never drags on to the point where you feel its runtime. The Child absolutely straps his audiences into a seat and proceeds to give them one of the most satisfying rides of 2023. The number 2 movie on this list is Tetris. Yes, that's right, a movie about Tetris. A film placed in the backdrop of the late 1980s at the cusp of the fall of the USSR sees a man who wants to buy the video game rights of a game that he believes will be a smash hit. The problem is he has to go into enemy territory in order to attain them. Taron Egerton gives a brilliant performance in this film as a video game designer who will stop at nothing to achieve success, even if that means life in prison in a foreign hostile country. Tetris is one of the best acted films in 2023. The serious and dramatic portrayal of this story does the film far more wonders in tackling it from a comedic standpoint, because it actually allows the audience to understand the seriousness of the situation at hand, which makes for a far more engaging story. Tetris is an absolute goldmine in a dark pile of bad streaming service movies. If you have Apple TV, this is probably one of the few movies that is worth watching. And the number 1 movie of 2023, to no surprise, is Oppenheimer. There are only a handful of good filmmakers left in Hollywood that actually inspires actors to bring their A game, and Christopher Nolan is one of them. Oppenheimer is the strongest acted film in 2023. The movie showcases a catalog of big-name actors like Robert Downey Jr., Emily Blunt, among others, who poured their heart and souls into the characters that they portray. Nolan's ability to direct talent is nothing short of impressive. Being able to get the absolute best out of his actors puts this film head and shoulders above its competition. Once the wheels of this story turn, you won't even notice the near 3-hour runtime of the movie. It's that good. Oppenheimer is a film that gets an A+ effort from everyone associated in the filmmaking process, and their reward is being the best film on the big screen this year.